I'm Natalie Quinn. And if anyone's ever told you that family can't betray you, then they've clearly never lived under the same roof as my Aunt Lorraine. They said I owed them everything. That if it weren't for them, I wouldn't have had a place to live after my mom passed. They loved to throw around words like gratitude, but somehow it always felt more like a leash than a lifeline. Then one day, I inherited my grandma's coastal vacation home, a piece of the estate, and the only thing in my entire life that ever felt truly mine. But the moment I moved in, my aunt looked me in the eye and said, "That house belongs to the family. It's not just yours." They weren't named in the will. They had no legal claim. And yet they walked around like they owned the place. Bit by bit, they started planting flags. The curtains, the master bedroom, even the front porch swing. Then one day, I accidentally called my uncle, and he forgot to hang up. I heard everything. The whole plan. Every insult, every manipulative tactic, every smug little whisper. "She's easy to control. A little guilt trip, she'll sign it over." They thought needing them made me weak. They were wrong. I recorded it all. I got ready. And while they were off relaxing in Colorado money that came from me, I sold the house they thought was theirs. On the stone countertop, I left a note. "If I was ever a burden, then consider me gone. Don't click away." Because what they did next, that's when things turned truly terrifying. I used to think I was lucky. After my mom passed from a stroke, I was just 14. My dad had disappeared from my life when I was 3. There was no one left, no close family. So my Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Martin took me in a little coastal town called Coastville, Oregon. At first, I called it a rescue. But looking back, it was just conditional pity. They never legally adopted me. Never once called me their daughter. Only niece. Ovary. Always with that look. The one that silently said, "You should be grateful, not everyone would take in a girl with no parents." At every dinner, I was the one washing dishes. On every birthday, I got a handwritten card and a phrase I still remember. "Be realistic, Natalie. Grown-ups don't live on gifts." I grew up feeling like I owed them, even when I hadn't taken anything but air to breathe. But I didn't push back. I stayed quiet. I studied hard. Started working part-time at 16. Earned a scholarship to the University of Oregon. Never asked them for a dime. Then I graduated. Become a financial advisor. Bought my first car with 3 years' worth of savings. Rented a little apartment of my own. I thought I'd finally escaped. But to Aunt Lorraine, I'd always be the charity case niece. Abur. When my grandma Lorraine's mother passed suddenly the year I turned 30, I thought I'd just attend the funeral, light a candle, and quietly go home. I had no idea she'd named only me in her will. Her beachside cottage. A beautiful 2,000 square foot wooden home by the ocean. It was officially mine. My aunt froze when the lawyer read that part. Uncle Martin just sat there, lips twitching slightly. No one said a word. But in that moment, their eyes changed. I didn't feel joy. Only pressure. A weight. And a strange sort of guilt. They had raised me. They had been the only family I had left. Was I being selfish for accepting Grandma's final gift without sharing it back? A month after I moved into the house, Aunt Lorraine started calling it our home. "You should repaint the walls, make it feel more like family." I left some old furniture in the garage. "Bring it into the living room. No presets. Your uncle's thinking about redoing the roof, costs a bit, but our home's worth it." At first, I smiled and brushed it off. But little by little, they pushed deeper. She even brought a mattress and set it up in the living room, just to stay a few days whenever we're at the beach. My uncle replaced the faucet, drilled holes in the walls to hang his paintings. I paid the electric bill. I paid the property tax. I fixed the plumbing, trimmed the garden, mopped the floors. But to them, I was the daughter who'd moved back into her parents' house. I remember one night so clearly. After a seafood dinner I had bought and cooked, Aunt Lorraine looked across the table and said, "Do you even understand how much you owe this family?" I froze. "What do you mean by that? If it weren't for us, you'd be in foster care. You're living here, in the house my mother left behind. That's a family circle, Natalie. Everything you've got came from someone else's kindness. This house, it can't just be yours." I gave a half smile. But inside, my heart went cold. They didn't need legality. They didn't need reason. All they needed was for me to still feel indebted. Then came the Colorado trip. They said, "It's been so long since we took a vacation together." I declined at first. But Aunt Lorraine sighed and said, "Well, if a few dollars matter more to you than family, then forget it." So I caved. Covered almost all the expenses, because I thought I was still repaying their kindness. I stayed behind to watch the house. They flew off. I thought things would stay quiet. Until the day I called Uncle Martin. The details of that call I'll tell you in the next chapter. But let me leave you with this. Some phone calls make you cry tears of joy. Some remind you life is worth living. And some calls turn you into a stranger to your own family. That was the moment I stopped being their easily guided niece. That was the moment I decided to walk away from the good girl role they had cast me in for the last 17 years. It started like any normal phone call. That afternoon, light rain tapped against the porch roof of the beach house. I'd just come home from work, 3 back-to-back financial consultations. An elderly couple, a single mom, and a young man full of ambition and grit. I remember standing in the kitchen, drying dishes with a towel, when I noticed water pooling under the sink. The faucet installed by Uncle Martin himself was leaking steadily onto the wooden cabinet below. Not wanting the damage to spread, I dialed the number he was using while in Colorado. A few rings. Then the connection picked up. "Hello?" His voice crackled slightly. He was somewhere up in the mountains. "Uncle, it's Natalie. The kitchen faucet started leaking. Do you remember where the warranty paperwork is?" A clipped sigh. "Bottom drawer in my office desk. But seriously, can't that wait? Your aunt and I are heading out to dinner. The water's dripping into the cabinet. I just need the warranty number to call the company." Yeah, just leave it. Goodbye." The call should have ended. But he didn't hang up. And that's when I heard everything. Aunt Lorraine's voice. Who was that? Uncle Martin. Natalie. Something about the faucet. Always something to complain about. My aunt scoffed. She acts like she cares so much about that house. She doesn't even know. It might not be hers much longer. I clutched the phone tighter. My heart started pounding. "Uncle, we need to speed this up. When we get back, we'll sit her down. Play the age card. Retirement. Guilt from the past, it'll work. Aunt. She's still soft. Just remind her of what we did for her. She'll hand it over like always." And then they laughed. That quiet kind of laugh. Like a dull blade. No blood. But it cuts straight through the bone. I thought about hanging up. I should have hung up. But even my biological parents had never talked about me like this. Uncle Martin. She thinks that finance degree makes her something special. But she's just been riding on our coattails from the beginning. Aunt Lorraine. Mom only left her the house because she was good at sucking up. That house should have gone to us. Uncle. Oh, it will. She can't afford to live there forever. Keep layering on that guilt, and she'll sign it over without a fight. I couldn't feel my surroundings anymore. The kitchen around me felt frozen in time. The sound of water dripping onto the floor felt like blood leaking from my chest. And then they started talking about the bedroom. "Aunt, when we get back, we're taking the master. She's out working all day. What does she need the big room for?" Uncle. "And those stocks she's been investing in. I bet we could convince her to co-fund that vacation rental idea. Then slowly flip the deed into our name. Ender Devon." I wasn't their niece. I was a financial plan. An asset they'd been cultivating since I was 14. Just waiting to cash out. My hand shook so hard, I nearly dropped the phone. But before the line finally disconnected, I managed to open the voice recorder on my second device. I wasn't crying. I wasn't hurt anymore. There was only one thing left in me: clarity. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my home office, lamplight glowing over blueprints of the house, property tax forms, and my grandmother's will. Every document, every word, reminded me this was my home. Not theirs. Not some shared family asset. But a gift. From the only person who ever loved me without conditions. She saw something it took me 3 decades to finally understand. Family isn't a loan agreement, where one side pays forever, and the other just keeps collecting interest. I opened my laptop, typed the first line of an email to my lawyer. I need to confirm my sole legal ownership of the property currently in my name. Then I opened a second browser tab and searched. Sell home privately, no public listing, Oregon. The plan had begun. I wasn't polite Natalie anymore. I scheduled the meeting for Monday morning. A light mist still clung to the steps as I walked into the office of Sharon Whitfield, an estate and property attorney I'd worked with a few times before. She didn't ask many questions, just stared at me for a long moment as I placed my phone on her desk and hit play. Uncle Martin's voice cut through, sharp as a blade. She still wants to feel accepted. The trick is making her feel guilty enough. She'll sign. I'm on. Then came Aunt Lorraine's voice. If she won't sign, we'll just move in for good. Who throws out the people who raised them? When the recording ended, silence filled the office. Sharon gently set her teacup down and tilted her head at me. Natalie, are you ready? I frowned. Ready for what? Ready to accept that from this point forward, your relationship with them will never go back to what it was. I gave a faint smile, but my chest tightened like a vice. That relationship already died. I'm just the one writing the death certificate. Sharon nodded. Good. Then let's begin. She explained everything clearly. Since my grandmother had left the house solely to Menno co-owners, no stipulations, no occupancy rights for anyone else, I had full legal authority. Your aunt and uncle can call it a family home all they want, Sharon said. But, legally, they're just uninvited guests. He blinked. Even though they've been living there almost a year? No lease, no payments, no legitimate investment. They have 0 rights. And, if I want to sell? You absolutely can. You don't need anyone's permission. Once again, my hands started to shake. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from freedom. That night, I opened my laptop and made a list. Not a to-do list. A list of things I needed to remove from my life. Joint bank accounts linked to them. The old email address my aunt once used to help me apply for scholarships. The mailing address Uncle Martin used to register subscriptions under my name. Shared photos. Those memories I kept, only because I was afraid to forget. I called a colleague, Trevor, who handled high-end real estate, and said simply, I need to sell a house. Quietly. Quickly. No trace left behind. 3 days later, we had 3 serious offers. All from city folks looking for a quiet weekend getaway. I didn't put up a for sale sign. Didn't post on social media. Didn't tell a soul except my lawyer and my broker. Meanwhile, I rented a storage unit 20 minutes away. Paid 6 months in advance. Labeled the recipient Lorraine and Martin Quinn. Friday night, I started packing. I divided everything into 3 piles. 1. Mine furniture I'd bought. Books, electronics, personal files. R. There's items they brought in themselves. Wall art, blankets, fishing gear. 3. Gray area. Things with emotional overlap. Mugs printed with family photos. Pictures of me, Aunt Lorraine, and Uncle Martin from 10th grade. The 3rd pile? I didn't keep. I didn't need physical proof of emotional debt. I needed release. Saturday night, I sat alone in the empty living room, holding the letter my grandmother once wrote, the one I hadn't read until the week before. My dearest Natalie, this house is a symbol of trust. Not because you've never made mistakes, but because you never lived off the mistakes of others. Your aunt and uncle. They always wanted what they never earned. But you laid every brick in your life by hand. And I believe you'll know when to hold on. And when to let go. Love. Grandma. I cried. But this time, it wasn't from pain. It was from certainty. Sunday morning, Trevor called. The third buyer is in. $887,000. All cash. Wants to close in 2 weeks. I looked around. At the wooden wall where Grandma's old pendulum clock once hung. The window where I used to sit and watch the tide roll in. The kitchen where she taught me how to make soup as a little girl. I said, accept the offer. That afternoon, I printed out a single sheet of paper. Wrote it by hand. Slowly, carefully, like I was writing on behalf of every wound I'd swallowed for 17 years. I left the note on the kitchen counter, right beside the sink where the leak had started it all. If I was ever a burden, then now, I've removed myself. 3 days after I officially signed the paperwork to sell the house, Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Martin came back from their Colorado vacation. I didn't know because they told me. I knew because of the first text that hit my old phone at 10:12 a.m. Natalie, what is going on? Why is the lock changed? Call me now. Lorraine Quinn. 5 minutes later, a missed call from Uncle Martin. Then a voicemail, his voice tense and angry. Natalie, if this is some kind of joke, you've taken it too far. Why is the house empty? Where's all the stuff? We can't get in. Call me back before this goes any further. I didn't answer. I had prepared for this moment. The moment they realized everything they took for granted was gone. By noon, they found the note I left on the stone kitchen counter. Handwritten. No long explanation. No defense. If I was ever a burden, then now, I've removed myself. That night, my phone nearly exploded. Texts. Voicemails. Even the old email account. One of the messages from my aunt read, "You're tearing this family apart. If your grandmother were alive, she'd be so disappointed in you." I read it. Didn't reply. An hour later, Uncle Martin's third voicemail came through. "You have no right. This was a family home. You can't just sell it off like an old couch. We'll sue. Don't think silence means you're safe." The next day, they showed up at my old office pounding on the doors, shouting. But the front desk staff had already been briefed. Security escorted them out. I got a text from Trevor. "They showed up looking for you. Caused a scene, we had them removed, but they said they'd be back." I wasn't worried. The sale was legal. Ownership clear. Every document had been reviewed and signed off by my attorney. Still, I felt tired. Tired of always having to prove I wasn't a bad person. Just because I chose to be good to myself. That evening, I opened my laptop and logged into the new bank account. The one where I'd transferred the proceeds from the sale. 6 figures. Staring back at me. Cold and quiet. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel guilt. It just felt peace. The kind of peace you only get after dropping a backpack someone else has been stuffing full of rocks. For 17 years. 2 days later, they found my new email. Probably from a nosy old neighbor. The message was long, and exactly what I'd expect from them. A dramatic opening about the emotional trauma of discovering the house had been sold. A middle section listing all the sacrifices they'd made for me since 9th grade. And finally, an offer of reconciliation. If I bought a smaller house for the 3 of us to live in together, they'd be willing to forgive me. I didn't reply. I just forwarded the email to Sharon, my attorney. She replied with one line. "Keep your distance. Everything you've done is legally and morally sound." A week later, I moved into my new apartment. A small, cozy studio on the outskirts of Eugene. No ocean view. No flower garden. No memories of Grandma tucking me in at night. But it was mine. Fully mine. No one criticized how I hung my art. No one knocked on my door at 10 p.m. to ask if I still remembered to be grateful. That No one snooped through my mail under the excuse of checking finances. I drank tea in the mornings, read books at noon. For the first time, I lived without needing permission to be me. But the thing that brought me the most relief, it wasn't the money. It wasn't the tea. It wasn't the apartment. It was the truth. The truth that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't ungrateful. I wasn't too sensitive. I had been manipulated, used, and now I wasn't there anymore. One night, I listened to the recording again. The one where they called me their long-term investment. I stopped halfway through. Not because it hurt, but because it no longer had the power to scare me. I knew the day would come when I'd have to face them. And as it turns out, it came sooner than I thought. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of an online session with a new client when my backup phone started buzzing. No saved contact. I almost ignored it. But something in my gut told me, pick up. I answered. Hello? A man's voice came through cold, dry. This is Martin. We need to talk. I didn't say a word. Lorraine will be there too. Cafe 12. Corner of Maple. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. If you don't show, we'll come to your job again. And this time, don't expect anyone to help you. Then he hung up. I wasn't scared, but I felt something familiar rising. The quiet caution of a child who learned early that in some houses, gratitude is a weapon. I called Sharon, my lawyer. They want to meet, threatened to show up at work if I don't. Her answer was immediate. You don't have to go if you don't want to. But if you do, make sure it's public. And remember, you don't owe them anything. I paused, then nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I'll go. But this time, I'm not their Natalie anymore. The next morning, I arrived at Maple Brew at 9:15. Intentionally late. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A cream blazer, neatly tied hair, and a face that no longer carried cracks. I stepped inside and spotted them immediately. Sitting near the window, the stress and worry written all over their faces. I walked over. Didn't greet them with aunt or uncle. I looked them straight in the eye. Lorraine, Martin. Aunt Lorraine flinched. Uncle Martin narrowed his eyes. What kind of game is this? He snapped. I pulled out my phone, set it on the table, hit record, and said, this is a conversation. And I record all important conversations, especially with people who have threatened me. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then Lorraine said, her voice shaky, don't you think this is a bit much? I kept my eyes steady. You think it's too much because I sold the house that only had my name on the deed? You did it without saying anything. Not a word, she said, nearly choking on her words. I calmly tapped my phone, scrolled to the voice recording, and played the part where they talked about taking the master bedroom and flipping ownership. I let it run for exactly 45 seconds. Then stopped. I thought I was a burden, I said quietly. So I removed myself. Martin leaned back in his chair, fingers clasped together. So now you think you're better than us, huh? A little money, a little property. And you turn your back on the people who raised you? I held his gaze. Was it raising me, or investing in a future payout? His jaw tightened. If it weren't for us, you wouldn't have survived. Your grandmother leaving you that house, that was her mistake. But you should have known better. Knowing better means letting you manipulate me for the rest of my life? Knowing better means you don't betray blood. Lorraine cried out, tears forming. I didn't flinch. So being family means I pay for a vacation I never took? You call me a burden behind my back? Plot to take over the house that was legally mine? They fell silent. Then Martin gritted his teeth. You'll regret this, we'll sue. I laughed. Not to mock, but because I'd heard that line my entire life. And for the first time, it meant nothing. Go ahead. Sharon Whitfield, my attorney, reviewed every document, every tax filing, every cost. That house was never yours. Not once. Not ever. Lorraine's voice was barely a whisper. So what do you want now? I spoke clearly. Deliberately. I want no contact. No threats. No more using me as your excuse for why your life didn't turn out the way you hoped. I stood up. Your belongings have been moved to a storage facility. 6 months prepaid. Access code was sent to the old email. I paused, then looked at them one last time. I used to call you family. But real family doesn't make you feel guilty for daring to live your own life. I left the cafe. The morning sun warmed my shoulders. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, I was the one writing the ending to a relationship that was never fair. That night, after the final confrontation at the cafe, I sat alone in my new apartment. No one complaining. No one knocking on my door asking to talk for a minute. Just me, a cup of chamomile tea, and silence the kind that no longer scared me the way it used to. I opened my laptop, intending to write a thank you email to my lawyer, Sharon. But then I stared at the blinking cursor on a blank document. Empty. Like me, in that moment. I didn't write to Malavir. I wrote to the person who needed to hear it most. Myself. Letter to Natalie. No one is born knowing how to escape a trap disguised as family. And it took you nearly 30 years to learn this truth. Being loved conditionally is not love. They told you that you owed them. But if love requires obedience as payment, it's not family, it's a transaction. You were afraid of being ungrateful. Afraid of hurting them. You stayed when you should have left. You paid for peace with silence. You gave more than you had just for a shred of approval that never came. But Natalie, you are not wrong for wanting to be loved the right way. You are not wrong for growing up in a house where affection always came with strings. And most of all, you are not wrong for walking away. I don't know when the tears started, but they weren't the heavy, aching kind. They were soft, relieving, like something deep inside had unclenched. For the first time, I could hear my own voice, without someone else cutting in to correct it, scold it, or remind me to be grateful. I printed the letter. Didn't send it anywhere. Just folded it in half and tucked it into the journal beside my bed. A letter. Like a certificate that I was no longer the same Natalie I used to be. In the days that followed, I started reclaiming old habits I'd once loved. Not because I'd been too busy, but because I'd been forbidden. I started painting again. Bought watercolors, a new sketchbook, tiny brushes. I played jazz, sang along even if no one was listening. I texted Amy, my best friend from college, whom I drifted from after Aunt Lorraine decided she didn't like that girl. Amy texted back almost immediately. Oh my God, Natalie. You're alive? I've missed you like crazy. We called that night. And laughed until our stomachs hurt. Like two 19-year-olds tipsy on hard cider for the first time. I gave her a brief version of what happened. Not every detail. Just enough. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I used to think you were just too nice. But now I get it sometimes. Being nice is just how we survive. I also started therapy. Dr. Rowan, a specialist in family trauma and emotional abuse, asked me in our first session, Natalie, do you believe that parents or family can cause harm without realizing it? I was quiet for a long time. Then I said, they didn't just realize it. They planned it. Rowan didn't flinch. Didn't judge. She just said softly, then the first thing we'll work on is helping you stop feeling guilty for surviving. In a later session, I used a phrase I'd never said out loud before. Financial abuse. Rowan nodded deeply. Being controlled through money, guilt, obligation. That's a common form of psychological violence. And it's especially hard to recognize when the people doing it are your family. I almost trembled. I'd never thought I was allowed to use that word for my story. I always assumed abuse had to look louder, harsher, more violent. But sometimes, it's just the way someone convinces you that you owe them your entire life. A month after that session, I wrote a short blog post. No name attached. Title: I'm not ungrateful. I'm free. The post slowly made its way through online communities, filled with people who had lived through toxic family dynamics. And then the messages started coming in. From strangers all over the country. A single mom whose parents seized her assets after her divorce. A young man forced to repay his parents for the cost of raising him. A woman named Emily, living in a house her grandmother left her, being pressured to sign half of it over. And I realized I wasn't alone. I don't know how they found my new address. Maybe it was a nosy former neighbor. Maybe a careless delivery driver. Maybe they followed me. All I know is that I found out on a Saturday morning when Rachel, my neighbor down the hall, knocked on my door looking uneasy. Natalie. There's a couple in a gray SUV parked in the lot. They've been sitting there for almost an hour. Haven't taken their eyes off your window. I stepped out onto my second-floor balcony. And sure enough, there it was. The same SUV. Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Martin in the front seats, frozen. Like wax figures melting under the July sun. They didn't get out. They didn't knock. They just stared. I went back inside. Double-locked the door. Then picked up the phone and called Sharon, my attorney. They found where I live. Her voice tightened. Did they enter the building? Number. But they're parked outside like they're waiting. Zoe, send me photos of the car and the plates. I'll begin the paperwork for a civil harassment warning. If they come back again, we'll push for a restraining order. I ended the call. Outside, the sky was beginning to turn gray, hinting at rain. But I didn't feel cold. I didn't feel afraid. I just felt sure. The next day, they came back. This time, Aunt Lorraine stepped out of the SUV. I watched through the doorbell camera. She didn't knock. She didn't press the bell. She just stood there, staring at the door. Like she thought it might open on its own. I didn't move. Not once. After 5 minutes, she pulled a yellow envelope from her purse and slid it through the door. Then turned and walked away without a word. I waited 10 more minutes, checked the cameras, made sure they were gone. Then opened the door, picked up the envelope, and shut it quickly behind me. Inside was a handwritten letter. Natalie, you may think you've escaped, but you're just running. You call this freedom, but really it's betrayal. Family isn't something you take off like a coat just because it no longer fits. You sold a piece of our soul, the house your grandmother left behind. You did something unforgivable. But I'm still willing to talk. We can still fix this. You just need to feel remorse, and we can start over. Lorraine. I folded the letter. I didn't tear it. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I needed the evidence. I took photos and emailed them to Sharon. An hour later, she called. Her voice was sharp. They're trying to drag you back into a dependent role. Remorse. Repair. Fixing things, these are the words of someone seeking control. You don't owe them a response. The more you ignore them, the more their real selves show. I sat there, quiet for a long moment. Then exhaled. I don't want to hate them. But I can't love them anymore either. Not being able to love them anymore, Sharon said gently, is part of the healing process. It doesn't make you bad. It means you're choosing yourself. That night, I went out to my balcony. The same one where I usually drank my morning tea. But this time, I brought a pen and my leather journal. I wrote a single sentence in the middle of the page. I am not the old Natalie anymore. Then I added, I don't need anyone to validate my worth. I don't owe a lifetime of debt just because someone gave me food and shelter. I'm not afraid of being called ungrateful. I'm not a wallet bound by guilt. I'm not a parentless child in need of conditional pity. I am me. The one who stood up. The one who listened. The one who left. 3 days later, I got a notice from the court. Sharon had filed a civil harassment warning, a precursor to a formal restraining order, if needed. I never wanted things to get so legal. But sometimes, boundaries only get respected when they come with consequences. I haven't seen them since. Not in a car. Not on the street. Not in my inbox. Not in my mailbox. At first, the silence unnerved me. But then I realized this wasn't a storm waiting to return. It was recognition. They knew they'd lost control. And when someone who's used to holding power realizes they no longer have access to you, they retreat. Not out of respect, but because there's no doorway left. I'm in my 3rd month in this new apartment. Every morning, I make my tea, with no one around to complain. Every night, I pick the movie. No one fighting for the remote. Every day, I live, not shackled by the weight of invisible debt. No one would call it a victory. But to me, it's freedom. And sometimes, freedom is the only thing worth holding on to, even if it means letting go of the only family you've ever known. I never believed forgiveness was something you owed anyone, especially not something someone could demand from you, just to lighten the weight of their own guilt. Forgiveness, to me, had always felt like a dangerous word. It used to be a trap. Just forgive them, so things can go back to normal. But normal often just meant they got to take back control. And I went back to being the one who endured. Then one afternoon, while unpacking the last drawer in my new apartment, I found an old photo. Me at 10 years old, sitting beside Aunt Lorraine's stove, grinning, my face smeared with vanilla ice cream. Uncle Martin in the background lifting a pot of soup. I don't remember what the occasion was. Maybe a birthday. Maybe just a random Tuesday. But the little girl in that photo had no idea what price she'd one day pay. I held the picture for a long time, and I realized there was one person I had never forgiven. Not them. Me. I'd never forgiven myself for staying too long, for not leaving sooner, for letting them touch the softest parts of me, and calling it love. I blamed myself for paying for that vacation, for cooking dinner after they mocked my choices, for repainting the walls because they said, "That color doesn't feel like a family home." I blamed myself for needing approval from people who never knew how to give it. And that photo reminded me that I was just a child once, a child doing her best to stay in a place she thought she needed to earn. That night, I sat at my desk, opened the old leather journal, the one where I once wrote, "I am not the old Natalie anymore." And beneath it, I added, "But I still love that girl. The one who tried. The one who endured. The one who believed. And now, I forgive her. Not because she was wrong, but because she survived." The next day, I shared that journal entry anonymously on a forum for people healing from family trauma. The responses came quicker than I expected. Someone messaged, "I didn't realize how badly I needed to hear this." Another wrote, "Thank you. Now I know forgiveness isn't to give them peace. It's so I can finally breathe." I read every word. I didn't reply. I just smiled to myself. The following week, I had another session with Dr. Ronmi therapist. She asked, "When was the last time you felt proud of yourself?" And without hesitation, I said, "Yesterday, when I forgave the version of me I used to be." She nodded softly. "That's the final stage of recovery, Natalie. Forgiving yourself means you've stopped resisting your past. You're finally living in your present." After therapy, I stopped by the bookstore near my apartment. I meant to pick up just one book, but I left with 4. One on personal boundaries. One on emotional inheritance across generations. A collection of poetry. And a blank leather-bound journal. I wanted to begin again. Not by erasing my past, but by putting it in its rightful place. One soft blue Sunday, I drove out to the coast. Not the beach near my grandmother's old home, but a different stretch of shoreline, 70 miles away. No memories. Just sand, sunlight, and wind. I brought with me a small glass bottle. Inside was a handwritten note. "I forgive Natalie, and I'll never abandon her again." I threw it into the sea. Light, deliberate. It drifted away quickly, as if the ocean itself knew. There was no reason for it to come back. That night, I called Amy, the old friend I'd been reconnecting with lately. She picked up after 2 rings. Natalie. How are you? I smiled, leaned back against the pillow, and stared up at the ceiling, where the soft yellow light spilled across the plaster. I'm good, Amy. Really good. She laughed. You sound like you just let go of something heavy. I let out a small laugh of my own. I did. I let go of me. The older version. The one who lived for permission. Now I live for myself. It's been exactly 1 year since I signed the papers to sell my grandmother's house. 1 year since I left a note on the kitchen counter, changed the locks, and walked away without looking back. Time didn't make everything perfect, but it did something more important. It gave me distance. And with that distance, I could finally look back not with tears, but with gratitude. I drove to the old beach early in the morning, and Sosso's to the old beach early in the morning. A warm cup of coffee in my hand, light jazz drifting from the radio. No one came with me. I didn't need anyone to. I wasn't going to revisit memories. I went to see whether a memory, when viewed through the eyes of someone who's healed, could still hurt. The old house wasn't mine anymore. It had a fresh coat of paint, a different nameplate. The flower beds had been changed, the planters replaced with pebble grass. And I smiled. Not because I missed it, but because I no longer saw it as my home. I parked a few blocks away, carried a soft pink bouquet of peonies, grandma's favorite color, then drove to the small cemetery where she was buried. The morning breeze drifted gently through the eucalyptus trees. I sat down beside her headstone, laid the bouquet in front of her. At first, I said nothing. Then I breathed out, slowly. Grandma, I think I finally understand why you left the house to me, and not to them. You knew that house wasn't just a property. It was a test. Almond. And yes, they failed that test. But because of it, I passed my own. I told her about my new apartment. About my job that I still loved, but no longer did to prove anything. I worked now because I was good at it. Because I wanted to. I told her how I was learning to reconnect again. Not out of duty, but by choice. About the new friends. And the old ones, like Amy, who came back and stayed. About the mornings I woke up without the weight in my chest that used to come from constantly fearing that just being alive might disappoint someone. And then, I told her the biggest thing of all. Grandma, I forgave myself. I forgave myself for trying so hard to make them accept me. For thinking I was worthless when the truth was, I was just being used. For staying too long. But also, for having the courage to leave. I don't know if the dead can hear us. But one thing I do know for sure. I could hear myself more clearly than ever before. On the way back to Eugene where I live now. And where I feel alive. I listened to a psychology podcast in the car. The host said something that made me pull over just to write it down. Freedom isn't the absence of ties. Freedom is choosing what you allow to tie you. I turned on the dome light, looked at that line in my notebook, and asked myself, what ties me down now? And I realized, it's not obligation anymore. It's not fear. It's a quiet promise. To myself. The following week, I hosted my first workshop called Finances and Emotional Boundaries. When family shouldn't touch your wallet. I didn't expect a big turnout, but 32 people came. A single mother whose son pressured her to sign over her house under the name of family investment. A young woman whose brother demanded half of her inheritance. A 50-year-old man who never bought a home because he feared his mother would be angry if he dared to live alone. I told my story. No names. No details that could be traced. Just the truth. About someone who spent years being told to repay a debt that was never hers to begin with. After the session, a woman stood up, walked over, and hugged me tightly. She said, "Thank you for saying what I've spent a lifetime hiding." I answered simply, "No one owes anyone family. Real family never charges interest." That night, I came home, made myself a cup of peppermint tea, and sat out on the balcony. I thought about the old house. About the day I changed the locks. About the note I left on the counter. If I was ever a burden, then now I've removed myself. That day, I wrote those words in anger. Today, I read them again. With peace. Because now I understand. Being treated like a burden doesn't mean you are one. It means the people around you never learned how to share or how to love without keeping score. If you've ever spent a long time living to please others, you'll understand this. Freedom doesn't arrive like fireworks. It arrives like silence. One morning, you wake up, pour a cup of coffee, and realize you no longer feel the need to perform. No more smiling on cue. No more saying yes when you mean no. No more sitting in rooms that make you feel small. Freedom doesn't come from rebellion. It comes from an unshakable honesty. I am who I am. And I am enough. I used to think I had to have something to be seen. A degree. A home. The ability to stay in line. But the truth is, with people who always need you to stay beneath them, the more you grow, the more they feel threatened. And they'll try everything to pull you back down. Not because you're wrong, but because you've stepped outside their control. I used to apologize for my success. Used to shrink when I had money, afraid they'd say I was ungrateful. Used to hide my raises. Hesitated when I bought my first proper coffee machine. Because Uncle Martin once said, people who live alone and buy machines like that are just ridiculous. And for a while, I believed he was right. Until one day, I asked myself, why does someone else get to decide what's ridiculous in my life? That question was simple, but it unraveled everything. I started living without asking permission. Permission to rest. Permission to decline dinner invites just because we're family. 1. Permission to decorate my home how I like. 2. Hang my art. To paint just because it moves men, not because it has a purpose. I didn't need to explain why I lived alone. Didn't need to justify that I was doing fine, even if I wasn't married. Didn't need anyone's stamp of approval. I gave it to myself. One afternoon, sitting with a group of new friends, people I'd met through emotional finance workshops, someone asked me, Natalie, if you could go back, would you do anything differently? I thought for a moment, then answered, honestly, because the person I am today only exists because of everything I've survived. I used to think I'd lost something when I walked away from my aunt and uncle. That I'd lost a sense of connection, a picture of family. But I realized what I lost was just the illusion of kindness from people who never knew how to love without control. The illusion of a real family I had to bend over backward to maintain. The illusion that if I was good enough, quiet enough, selfless enough, I'd finally be loved. Without that illusion, I saw everything clearly. I started writing. Not for others, but for myself. For the younger versions of me. The girl standing in the kitchen listening to Aunt Lorraine lecture. The quiet woman watching Uncle Martin take over every decision. I wrote them a letter. You survived. Not because someone saved you, but because, one day, you finally chose yourself. I wrote letters to people like me. You are not selfish for refusing to share a house you legally own. You are not ungrateful for saying no to a vacation you didn't choose. You are not wrong for setting boundaries with those who always demanded more. You're just tired of living a life designed around someone else's comfort. I gathered those letters into a blog. No branding. No SEO. Just a real space. 3 weeks later, I received an email from a girl named Lainey. She was 22. She wrote, "You don't know me, but your post 'I don't ask permission to live anymore' stopped me from signing the co-ownership form my parents were pushing. I was ready to close my eyes and just sign it. But, because of you, I paused. And I asked myself, am I doing this because I want to, or because I'm scared? I'm still learning how to choose myself. But thanks to you, I now know I can." My hands trembled as I read the last line. Not because I had helped someone, but because I had become the person I once needed. when I was a little girl. And that's who I want to be. No title. No praise. No permission. Just honest with myself. I don't live to be loved anymore. I live to be real. I thought I'd never hear their voices again. After the legal warnings. After the cease and desist. After the lawyer's letters. After my silence in the face of message after message. I thought they finally understood. But I was wrong. One Friday afternoon, I was standing in my usual corner cafe. The one where I like to write on weekends. When my phone rang. Unknown number. Unfamiliar area code. I almost didn't answer. But something in me went still. A strange sinking feeling crept in. I picked up. Hello? A woman's voice came through. Raspy, tired, stripped of the authority it once carried. Natalie, it's Aunt Lorraine. I froze. The coffee nearly slipped from my hand. I said nothing. No confirmation. No reaction. I know you don't want to hear from me. But please. Just 1 minute. Still, I stayed silent. Your uncle and I were selling the house. Moving into something smaller. Things haven't been easy. Not easy at all. We said things we shouldn't have. I know that. But still, your family. And, if you could, maybe call back. Or send a few words. Silence. You don't have to forgive. But don't forget that we were family once. Then she hung up. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just felt still. Because I knew. That call didn't come from love. It came from failure. From disappointment. From the realization that the old target no longer had strings they could pull. And when control slips away, they start calling it family. That evening, I made a cup of jasmine tea and sat alone on my balcony. The breeze was soft, the lights gentle. Just another peaceful night I'd chosen for myself. I opened my phone and looked at the missed call. No voicemail. No text. Just one call. As if everything that had happened was a simple misunderstanding. I thought about it for a long time. I wasn't angry anymore. There was no room left for that. Anger had stepped aside to make space for clarity. I wasn't afraid of them. And I didn't need their admission of guilt. Because I didn't need acknowledgement to know I had done the right thing. I didn't need an apology. If it was only going to be a way to pull me back into a relationship that never respected me. The next morning, I wrote a message. Not long. Not bitter. Not emotional. Just truth. Aunt Lorraine. I got your call. I hope you and Uncle Martin find peace and comfort in your next chapter. But to live fully in what I've chosen for myself, I will not be continuing this connection. Not out of resentment, but because I deserve a life free of conditions and manipulation. I sent it. Didn't wait for a response. Didn't expect one. I'd closed that door. Quietly. Without slamming it. Not out of hate. But because I finally understood. There was nothing left for me on the other side. That afternoon, I walked to the park near my home. No headphones. No phone. Just me. And the rustling leaves. I sat on the same bench, where I once wrote my first words about freedom. And I smiled. A real smile. Not guarded. Not performative. I wasn't the girl afraid of being left behind. Not the one trying to earn her place. Not the nice niece, ready to repaint her room just because someone didn't like the color. I was the woman who had chosen herself. And that was enough. That night, I shut my laptop early. No writing. Not checking emails. I turned on music and danced alone in my living room. No choreography. No rhythm. But for the first time, I danced not because someone was watching. And maybe that was the greatest victory of my life. Not the house I sold. Not the money in the bank. Not the blog being shared around the internet. But the moment I realized, I don't need to be chosen anymore. Because now, I am the one doing the choosing. I used to think freedom happened in one big, dramatic moment. like signing the papers to sell the house, like leaving without a word, like slamming an old door shut. But the truth is, freedom is a habit. It doesn't begin with a grand act. It begins with the small things you do over and over, every day. Not replying to guilt-laced messages. Not asking permission to enjoy peace. Not explaining why you want to be alone on the weekend. Freedom is when you start living from the inside out. One Monday morning, I stepped into my new office. Not my old job, but a cozy space I rented myself, where I host workshops for young women. On finance and emotional boundaries. On the door, there's a small wooden sign, hand-carved. You are not selfish, you are sovereign. And that's what I want everyone who walks through this space to feel. You don't owe anyone a lifetime of suffering, just because they once gave you a plate of food. I placed a new photo on the desk. Not of my grandmother, not of me as a child, but of me now. Smiling wide in a denim jacket, holding a cup of tea, eyes fully open. Because I don't want to just live as someone who survived pain. I want to live as someone who is truly enjoying her peace. That's when I met Mira, a woman in her 40s with softly curled hair and a warm, slow smile. She signed up for the workshop because she wanted to learn how to say no to her in-laws. After class, she stayed behind and asked me, "Natalie, if someone loves you, but still hurts you, does that mean they never really loved you?" I looked at her. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Maybe they love you the only way they know how. But if the way they love you makes you forget who you are, then that love isn't meant for you." She teared up, didn't say anything, just nodded and hugged me tightly before she left. I no longer think I'm special for surviving, because I've come to realize there are so many others quietly enduring the same things I once did. And if even one part of my story helps someone stand up, then none of what I've lost has been in vain. One spring afternoon, I visited the old house. Not to take anything back, just to see it one last time, with different eyes. It had been painted a soft blue. The wooden door replaced with white glass. Lavender now bloomed in the front yard. Nothing felt like mine anymore. And that didn't make me sad. I stood there for a few minutes, then turned and walked away without regret. I didn't need to leave anything behind. Didn't need to reclaim anything either. Because everything I needed, I had carried with me, in my heart, for a long time. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. Not from Lorraine. Not from Martin. But from their daughter. The one I thought had completely taken their side. But it turns out, she too had lived in quiet silence. Her letter read, "I read your story. At first, I was angry. But then, I went quiet. Because what you wrote was everything I've felt. Thank you for telling the truth. Thank you for not staying silent. Even though it meant losing your entire family. I'm not as brave as you yet. But because of you, I know there's a way out." I folded the letter, held it to my chest. And for the first time in years, my heart opened fully, gently without bitterness. Only love. Love without condition. That night, I rewrote the sentence that changed my life and taped it to my bedroom mirror. I'm not ungrateful. I'm just someone who chose to live honestly. I turned off the light, crawled into bed. No one texted to ask if I was coming home for dinner. No one warned me not to overspend. No one whispered, "You should be more grateful." Just me, and the sound of my own heartbeat. If you're still listening by now, maybe you've been that person too. Living for someone else, sacrificing for promises that were never kept, believing that family is something you can never walk away from. I'm here to tell you, you're not selfish for choosing yourself. You're not cruel for refusing to be hurt again. And if someone makes you shrink, just to be loved by them, they don't deserve your heart. That's my story. The story of someone who was once called a burden, but who learned how to carry herself. And today, I don't need anyone's permission to live. I just need to be me. Thank you for listening.